Good evening, everyone. My name is Christine Bada-Schmidt, and as chairman of the Bada Shoe Museum, I'm just delighted to welcome you all to our 2020 Founders Lecture this evening. In the spirit of respect and friendship, I'd like to begin by recognizing the museum is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This area remains home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to learn together on this land. I'd like to take a few moments to talk about our founder and the beginning of the museum before I hand it over to Elizabeth Semmelhack, our creative director and senior curator, who will introduce Marcy Rogers, our wonderful speaker tonight. Sonia Bada is the visionary behind this extraordinary collection and museum. She was actually studying to be an architect, fell in love with a shoe man, and they spent the next 60 years traveling the globe building a shoe business. She became fascinated by the unique cultures around the world and their different interpretations of footwear and what we could learn from them. Some could be explained by the environment, climate, terrain, the raw materials available, but shoes tell us so much more. They are real markers of time and place. A core component of dress throughout the ages, they give a very intimate look into the wearer's life, but also a broader understanding of the world cultures and how they influenced each other. She didn't plan on building a museum when she started the collection. She was more interested in preserving and researching excellent and traditional craftsmanship and design. But the collection and the research grew in importance and had so many stories to tell. She wanted to share the excitement and the knowledge. The expression, put yourself in someone else's shoes, really resonates with us, as you can imagine. And now that travel has become so restricted, we've become more adept, all of us, at enjoying the virtual. So imagine slipping into the ruby slippers. Don't you feel like you're on that yellow brick path on the way to see the Oz wizard? Or imagine the dramatic landscapes of Mongolia if you're wearing the elaborately embroidered boots of the last monarch. Or listen to your fans as you wear your Michael Jordan Air Force Ones and make that basket. It's kind of fun, isn't it? In our founder's honor, our annual lecture brings to Toronto fascinating speakers from around the world of culture, design, and the arts. And tonight we are thrilled to have Marcy Rogers with us. Marcy is an incredibly talented, award-winning costume designer and author whose work does transport us directly into the production and the characters. I am so excited to get behind the scenes and learn about your creative process, Marcy. This year's event is a little different as we're not able to host all of you at the museum, but virtual does have some advantages. And I have to congratulate the museum team who've been wonderfully innovative in creating ways that you can visit us virtually. You can now sneak into our storage vaults on TikTok or YouTube. You can ask Curator questions or join the conversation in our salon series. And if you'd like to take the collection home with you, we published a beautiful coffee table book this year called The World at Your Feet. But perhaps the biggest difference of having you attend this evening virtually is probably many of you are not even wearing shoes. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Semmelhack, the Bada Shoe Museum's creative director and senior curator. Elizabeth has curated more than 20 of the ambitious and originally researched exhibitions at the museum, including On a Pedestal, which was a superb show of Renaissance showpieces, to Out of the Box, the sneaker culture, a blockbuster traveling show for us that went through the US and all the way to Australia. Elizabeth's also published numerous wonderful books and is the world's most recognized shoe historian. Whether it's the Metropolitan Museum, BBC News, National Geographic, or L'Officiel magazine, if they have a question about shoes, she's the one they call. Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Christine. It is a very exciting night. And as Christine said, our speaker this evening is Marcy Rogers. She is an award-winning costume designer, creative producer, and author. And I think that just a quick glance over the body of her work reveals somebody with incredible visual acuity, with a deep knowledge of history and the history of dress, and the remarkable ability to translate the nuanced aspects of character into the costumes that she creates. I think what I'm trying to say is that she is a force to be reckoned with. I'm so excited to be able to ask her questions this evening to find out how she came to this amazing career and what's happening in the future. But she herself is actually going to give you a backdrop into her own history and the projects that she's worked on. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce Marcy Rodgers. Hi, Marcy.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. And so I'm going to hand it over to you to do your PowerPoint.
Sure thing. So everyone, my name is Marcy Rogers. I am a costume designer for TV, television, film, as well as opera. Recently, I published and illustrated a book it's a short story based on my life. So we're gonna start the presentation. So we're gonna just kind of glance over some of my past work over the years since I graduated with my MFA from University of Maryland in costume design. Here you will see some of the images of my stage work. Black Nativity is a musical that I actually dedicated to my mentor, Reggie Ray, while I was in grad school. And this particular production made it to the Washington Post. So this one is very special to me because at the time, that's when I was entering into the professional phase of my career. And more recently, I had the honor to design Tremonisha, which is an opera that was written by Scott Joplin, which will actually, it would be an opera next year, 2021. Here you will see, this is film and television. She's Gotta Have It, season 1 and season 2. This was a huge honor. This was one of my very first projects as it relates to film and TV, and I'm forever indebted and honored to have brought Spike Lee's vision to life, be it on the more so on the TV side, and bring back those iconic characters, which was obviously Mars Blackman, Nola Darling, Greer Childs, as well as Jamie Overstreet. Here was another huge honor of mine, where I was able to work with the phenomenal Steven Soderbergh, as well as collaborate with Andre Holland on High Flying Bird. We actually shot this in New York. So this was a pretty special project as well. I'm not sure if you all know, but I actually costume designed Black Klansman. And this also was special for me because I was able to, collaborate closely with the production designer, Kurt Beach. But also it was really cool to have Ron Starworth there and have him as a reference to, kind of get back into the world of the 70s and particularly Colorado, which is very specific at the time. Oh, sorry. Well, last year I had another honor of bringing Tang Clan back to life, season 1, and it was a beautiful experience in a sense where it was the 90s, being someone from Chicago, where I grew up in a suburb of Chicago. I remember seeing Wu-Tang, in the magazines, The Source, XXL, but to actually bring that back that was a dream. And then what you're gonna see next, so because we might go straight into it, is this is a project which was another honor, where I was able to costume design as well as star in a Ford Motors commercial, which only featured at the time women of color.
Phenomenal doesn't just happen. It's designed with intention, assembled with care, and even even still, to bring it all to life takes a sprinkling of magic. Introducing the unmistakably new 2020 Ford Escape, built phenomenally.
Whoops, sorry about that. This slide is pretty special to me. Over quarantine, I wrote a book about my life, and more so just inspiration for the reader. And, you know, I call it a children's book, but many who have read it have told me that they've walked away reading it, just being inspired to just follow their dreams. You know, during the tough times within the past couple of months, and I'm sure, you know, that's personal to each person. I just felt like speaking life into whoever at the, you know, particularly kids, was important for me. And I don't necessarily feel like 2020 is canceled. I think that this is a time for reset. So, you know, I quarantined in my childhood bedroom, and I wrote a book. I illustrated the book. You know, I pulled out yarn, I pulled out paper, and I started gluing. And now we have a masterpiece. And then hopefully within the next year or two, it will turn into a animation series. And here is just a slide of some of the articles that I've done and that I've had the honor of being featured in within the past couple of years. And thank you.
Well, you're not done yet. So now I get to grill you, ask you questions. And I just want to tell everybody, because we literally have hundreds and hundreds of people who are tuned in for this, that we're gonna have a nice Q&A together, but then we want to set enough time aside to be able to try to answer questions. So if you out there have questions, just put them into the Q&A box, and then when the question and period time comes to an end, then I'll start turning to those and we'll try to answer those. Okay. So I think my first question to you, because it is such a interesting career with a lot of highlights already, right? Is when did you actually know that it was costume design? Because at Howard, you were not studying costume design yet, correct?
No.
You have to, and so how did you decide to make that transition and begin to focus on it in graduate school?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I didn't really know what it meant to be a costume designer, even when I would say it, you know? So I guess we should back up a bit. And prior to me transitioning into being a costume designer, I actually was the assistant director of admissions at Howard University School of Law. Okay. So when I had the opportunity to obtain my master's in business administration, I actually have a corporate master's in business administration from Florida International University. At that point, I wanted to be a dean of a fashion program. And,
interesting.
You know, there was that time in the country where a lot of universities were unfortunately having to take furloughs. Their employees were having to take furloughs. And I had enough vacation time where I decided to go study abroad at Central St. Martin's in London. And when I went to Central St. Martin's, I was there for about 3 weeks. While I was there, I was reading the book, The Alchemist. And I would not take the tube, but I would take the bus, the double-decker bus, just to try to get my way around the law of the land. And long story short, when I came back to America, that's when I realized my life had forever changed. But I didn't really know what it meant to be a costume designer. I just said I wanted to be a costume designer. And at that point, that's when I manifested my mentor, which I mentioned earlier, Reggie Ray, who was a professor at Howard University in the theater arts program. And he took me under his wing. To be quite honest with you, when we started, he still didn't teach me how to be a costume designer. You know, it was more so how to like be a great assistant. And I remember, I was telling the story earlier. I remember I said I wanted to go to Yale for costume design. I had no experience whatsoever in any of it, for that matter. And it just so happened Helen Huang, who was the director of the costume design program at University of Maryland, she really stuck her neck out for me, and she accepted me into the program with no experience. And that's pretty much how my journey started. I started at Maryland it's both semesters. In the spring semester, And I joke around and say it, but I believe I was a bit of a science project because I had to learn everything. I had to learn a new language. So that was my journey. You know, there were days where I would literally break down a script or just teach myself how to render and paint and watercolor and just fabric swatch and just try to absorb as much as I can.
So that actually brings me, it's perfect segue to the next question, which is, you know, the talk is titled From Scripts to Sneakers. And so can you actually walk us through the process? You know, when you're brought into a project, what happens next?
Well, it depends on the project. If it's theater, funny enough, if it's theater or opera, the process happens beforehand, right? So like I get the script, it's more, I don't want to say it's more of an intimate collaboration with the set designer and the lighting designer, but it is in a sense where, you know, we come together and we have our color palettes. I'm able to see the lighting designer, their research to see if their lighting is going to be cool or light.
And so is that because it's like a set space?
Yes.
A theater? Okay. Yep.
I tell people every day the theater comes to life, but the set doesn't change.
Right.
It makes sense. But then when you fast forward to film, you know, when I'm dealing with a production designer, that is also, depending on the production, that's when we're very, very tight knit. You know, it may be research that I have that doesn't necessarily pertain to wardrobe, but it helps the world. And I've had that happen before. I actually, funny enough, Kurt Beach and I on Black Klansman, we were together. You know, he'd be like, "Hey, Marcy, I'm using a blue card. So, you know, in case you plan on putting, you know, Ron in blue, think about this value blue." So we connected very closely with that.
Yeah, that was a question that you and I discussed a little bit yesterday, which was, where does set design differ? Like, where is the line drawn between set design and costume design? Because I was thinking about Nola and the fact that her duvet covers, these big pieces of textile, change quite a bit, and they function to me visually in this kind of fashion sense. And so, yeah, so how do you negotiate that? It sounds like sometimes it works quite well.
Well, it does. I mean, you know, it's like, again, this is one thing I learned at Maryland, University of Maryland, is like the word collaboration. So everybody's coming together to put their research together so that we can make a beautiful picture or a beautiful story, or, you know, tell the story. So I think, you know, particularly She's Gotta Have It was a little bit more fashion forward, or fashion, you know, it was just stylized because one is Brooklyn.
Right.
And it's, you know, it's contemporary. So she would have, based on her character and based on her backstory, she would have those colorful duvets. She would have the colorful, you know, costume, you know, and there were times in the costume with Nola that I toned her down a bit because I knew that I wanted another character to be a little bit more colorful. So, yeah.
Have you ever had, because, you know, I know that you do serious sort of historical research, and what happens, or have you ever had an instance where you just really feel that this historical character would be dressed in a certain way, the director or maybe somebody else has a different feeling about it? How do you negotiate those kinds of challenges?
Well, I think I hate to use the word challenge because that seems like at that point somebody has a, you know, there's a
bad, right. Yeah, so we can take the word challenge out.
Well, I mean, because people ask me that all the time. I think for me, it's more so, you know, one thing I learned at Howard University when I was the assistant director of admissions was you recruit, right? So you have to, you learn people skills.
Right.
So quickly. And so I think when I'm working with directors, what I try to do is, one, excite them with my research, because the moment that they get excited, then there's not that, there's no, I wouldn't say there's no room, but, you know, they're going to probably lean towards what I'm trying to get at, you know, because it will only help. And also at that point, I'd say, well, I've spoken to the production designer, I've spoken to the department head of hair, and we're on the same page. What do you think? Right. It's always a what do you think, or how do you feel? And so particularly with Ron Stallworth, I remember having a conversation about his costume, and it dawned on me at the end of the movie when they're having the initiation. I didn't feel like he should be in a suit. I
Mhm.
felt like he should be in a walking suit, which was the denim suit that I dressed his character in. And when I presented my research and I presented my case, it was approved. So, and I think it was quite brilliant because it allowed John David to feel like he was going in and out of the worlds that he would have gone in and out of anyway, that he would have almost been exposed if he had on a suit, you know?
Right. Yeah. So I have a question about the commercial.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're in it and you're the stylist.
Yeah.
So I have a question that sort of has some bearing on my experience as well, which is, because you're a stylist, how do you style yourself, especially when you're going to be a character on, you know, in this commercial? And does it at all sort of bleed into how you dress in your daily life? Like, I get questions all the time about what kind of shoes am I wearing, or why do I choose that pair of shoes? And I'm almost paralyzed because I'm like, shoes have so much meaning. And so do you experience the same thing?
So it's funny because when I was styling the commercial, I waited to the very last minute to choose my outfit. It was almost to the point where, you know, the Ford crew, they were like, I had a look together and they were like, Marcy, that's not how you dress. And I was like, well, but it's
I'm
not
styling myself.
right. And they were like, actually, it is about you. That's why you're in the commercial. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know. And then when it happened, it was, I had to dash out I had gotten everybody dressed. I had gotten a talent dress in both commercials. And they said, just go find something that represents you, And at that point, that's when I found the purple blazer and the pink pants. But in answer to your question, yes. Like there's, like today I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna wear?
I know. So, I'm guiltily not wearing shoes.
And it's funny because that I'm gonna put on shoes. So it's difficult, but yeah. I admire the fact within myself where I kind of like try to play the background, even though in the commercial that was not the case.
So because we're a shoe museum, and I know that you also have a thing for shoes. One, where do shoes fit into building costumes? Like, are they an afterthought? Are they the first thought? How, do you have a way that you approach shotting your characters? Oh, sure. And then also, if you can segue into just shoes for yourself and where shoes fit into your own life.
Oh God. Well, and answer your question for the characters that I dressed, yes. Yeah. Obviously we can definitely go back to one of my first projects, which was She's Gotta Have It. And Mars wearing the iconic Jordans, that was a must. And so a lot of the design that I did for his costume definitely stemmed off of his shoes. Yeah. As well as Nola. I was very particular about the shoes Nola wore. I was very particular about the shoes Clorinda wore. Mm-hmm. Because I also wanted to separate them, but they also be a bit of an ensemble. Season 1, there's actually a scene. It's a club scene where Nola and Mars go on a date. Mm-hmm. They're dancers on the stage with a guy who's a rapper, and I purposefully made them like the Bobbsey twins, And so that in that moment, that shoes and the way that I select them is purposeful. The project that I'm wrapping now, which is a 1950s project based in Detroit, shoes are, and this, 100% important, and it'll tell whether or not
what class you are,
housewife. It'll tell whether or not someone's an executive. It'll tell whether or not someone's been walking, and that's walking their only means of transportation. And to be honest, it's funny. I just fit an actor 2 days ago, and I had 6 pairs of shoes. Actually, and it's funny because they were all 6 pairs of black shoes. And
were they businessmen's brogues, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I had Alan Edmond, I had Bally.
Oh right, yeah, we were talking about Alan Edmond. Yeah.
And I went with the Bally, and then
interesting.
Well, when we put which the movie will come out next year.
Yeah.
I can't say what, but when we I saw him, I was like, oh, it makes sense now. You know, it's just an expensive shoe. It actually matters. So to segue to myself,
Yeah.
I have been wearing sneakers since I was in high school. So shoes has always been a thing for me. I remember being in high school and my mother would, you know, pull me aside during lunch and I would have the new Jordans. I'd have, I mean, well, at the time in the 90s, Jordans and, you know, the Chicago or Chicago proper was huge.
Oh yeah, big deal. And so it was your mom?
Yeah, it was my mom.
That's so interesting.
My mom, she, I guess she figured that I had a liking to shoes. And I mean, yeah, I remember back then I had Penny Hardaways. I had I actually, it's funny, I just found another pair of shoes, Tim Hardaway. Like that was my favorite shoe. I didn't really start wearing heels until I got to college, to be quite honest. And I mean, you know, I think those are appropriate for certain occasions.
Right, certain occasions. They are certainly being challenged by sneakers, I think.
For sure.
Yeah, which is interesting to see.
Yeah.
Well, and so speaking of shoes, I don't know that anybody out there knows, but that you're part of our new acquisitions committee that's focused on building the museum's collection of footwear designed by Black designers. Mm-hmm. And I think, one, thank you so much for being on that, a part of that group. It's a really amazing team. And I can't name everybody, but I think a few people out there, Dwayne Edwards, I think is here, and Emily Anandu is here as well. And so thanks, guys. Other members, George Sully, Canadian shoe designer, Jacques Slade. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
And Frank Cook. And so it's an amazing group of people, hearing everybody's opinions. But the reason I thought we could talk a little bit about it is it segues actually into some of the things that you talk about in your book, which is hope. Mm-hmm. I think that museums, you know, I think we think of museums as places that tell history, but contemporary collecting and increasing what it is we collect, who we collect, I think is an exercise in hope that museums can do. I don't know how you feel about this, but I know that you yourself want to have a museum someday. Mm-hmm. And so why do you want to have a museum?
Well, I you know, I think this is my moment to definitely pay homage to Ruth Carter, because she has a traveling exhibit that, you know, she has a collective of her costumes that she's, you know, traveled within the US. And, mm-hmm. you know, I one thing that I think is important is it bags up to the question when you asked me, why did I want to become a costume designer? Yeah. When I was in high school, I didn't even know this was a career.
Right.
And then when I thought I was getting close enough to the career, I still didn't know what it meant, right? I didn't know what it meant to be a costume designer. I didn't know what it meant to create a costume, but that costume has a backstory. And so the reason why and I've become more adamant about I guess archiving my costumes is because my costumes tell a story that are also a part of history, be it fictitious or not. And when someone comes in, mm-hmm. you know, a child or a little girl, a little boy of color, and they see it, they see, like you said, they see hope. They don't necessarily have to want to be a costume designer, but it'll kind of intrigue them a bit to want to understand a little bit more about film and storytelling, because that's really what it is storytelling to me, you know.
It is, absolutely.
And I think it's important for that to be told. I think it should never go away, to be quite honest. And you know, one thing I do admire about Spike, for those who may be in Brooklyn and have walked past his office, is Spike has an archive, you know, and I remember going into his office for one of our first meetings where She's Gotta Have It, and literally looking around the room and just being inspired, you know, and just like, wow, that's a movie that I need to watch. Or that's the original poster of She's Gotta Have
Right,
It,
yeah.
53, you know, and I'm the costume designer, fast forward 30 years later, you know, and so that's important to me. And just really keeping our own history for that matter.
Yeah,
Or me being in
absolutely.
control of the narrative, I should say. On
Yeah,
my
I think that's correct. I think that is the other central part of that, right? Is having control over that narrative.
right.
Yeah. And so speaking of narrative, another good segue, let's talk about your book. Your book is really inspiring, and it's also interactive. And so how you said it a little bit, but tell us more about the book. I have it right here, and it's illustrated by you. And what do you hope people hope for when they end up reading this book?
I think I want people to definitely walk away with the idea that they could dream and not feel judged by it. The reason why I made it interactive is because, you know, in the beginning of the book, I talk about how, you know, I'm with my mother and I'm telling her, like, I'm getting excited by the idea of looking at art on the, you know, like graffiti on the wall or art on the wall. She's like, no, this can wait. And then once we get to, you know, further in the book, and I say to the reader, well, what do you feel when you see art on the wall? Like, to me, all of that, it stimulates something in anyone for that matter. You know, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So somebody can look at art and say, well, I don't necessarily think I'm good enough to be an artist, but wait a minute, am I good enough to be an artist? You know, and at what point do you jump out and you step out on faith and you actually go off and be the best artist that you want to be? So that's what the book is basically about. And, you know, and I do mention that I go off and I go to school and I obtain, at that point, it would be my bachelor's in business administration from Howard, just inferred for those who know my background. And then I remember, you know, going back home and saying the world is bigger than just my childhood home. So I went back out, and then that's when I found Reggie, or we found each other, I should say. And then I became the costume designer that I am now.
So we've talked a little bit about your past projects. You've sort of hinted at a project that you can't announce yet. You've suggested that you have this dream for a museum. But what else? Is there anything else that you can tell us that's upcoming, or a dream that you have, a hope that you have that you're trying to reach for?
Well, to be quite honest with you, with the book, I would like the book to turn into an animation series. I want the book.
I think that'd be great. Yeah.
I want the book to go from, you know, I definitely want it to be what it is, which is, you know, the book, and everybody, whoever reads it is interactive and they walked away like, I can do it. Yeah. But I truly believe that, you know, I for lack of better words, I would like it to turn into like my version of Dora the Explorer, because the way that the book is written, it stops with me, but my journey doesn't stop at that point.
At that point, right, of course.
So that's the goal, and that's the manifestation. I would like to also, if I can, you know, the way that the book is actually designed, which, you know, every page looks like a piece of art, and I did that on purpose.
Yes.
So I would
like beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I was very particular about the color. I was very particular about like the pattern and how the patterns matched with whatever. And, you know, I work with a layout designer, and she did an awesome job. So hopefully the idea is that, I don't know, maybe the book, the pronunciation is Majara, that she has a capsule collection, maybe for kids.
Interesting.
That would be cool. And then
some sneakers, maybe.
Yeah. And I'm actually going to release at some point a doll designed.
The next exhibition I'm doing is on dolls.
So, you know, it's funny, when I was at University of Maryland, one of my projects, I had to design a museum on dolls.
Okay, well, we won't talk about this right now, but I'll be calling you tomorrow.
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
It's so interesting. Dolls, doll footwear. Anyway, that's another talk. Okay, we've got a million questions.
Sure.
So I'm going to now move over, and we're going to start answering the questions that people are asking. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay, somebody's asked, and just anybody who's asked questions, these are all out of order. So don't worry if I don't answer your question, I ask your question right away. Okay, so how important has a mentor been to your journey?
Extremely important. I mean, you know, like I mentioned Reggie early on. Unfortunately, he passed my last year at University of Maryland. And I remember, you know, I remember going into that opportunity with my all, because at the time when I met Reggie, shortly after I met Reggie, via Facebook, we did a project in DC, and then he actually fired me. But he didn't fire me because I was a bad person. He fired me because I didn't show up early. He let me go because he said he couldn't have me full time. And to me, that was the closest I thought I had gotten to what, again, I thought a costume designer was. And I remember at the time we were in Southeast DC at the Big Chair restaurant. And I remember sitting there crying, like I was bawling, because like, God, I was so close to it. But now I have something that pays the bills, but it's not my heart.
Right.
And so Reggie definitely saw something in me, and he pulled it out of me for sure. As far as Helen Huang is concerned, she taught me how to be an artist. She taught me how to interpret art. She taught me how to interpret art through my mind's eye. She taught me how to believe in myself. And she also taught me how to stand up for myself, because there was a time in the program where I think at that point she felt like I wasn't up to par. And I remember one day she pulled me aside and she said, I might have to dismiss you from the program. And I remember looking at her saying, oh, that's absolutely not an option, ma'am. At that point, everything kicked into overdrive with me. Like I had to take those extra hours to learn how to, color value and how to paint, and even how to like hold a watercolor brush.
Right.
So at that point, I realized it's not about me. At this point, I'm representing everybody that's poured into me. That was from an educational standpoint. But when it became professional, at that point, I was representing, because while in grad school, I had assisted Ann Roth on a Broadway play. I had connected with Paul Tazwell, who's also a Broadway costume designer and film. I had connected, fast forward a bit, I had connected with Ruth Carter. I had connected with Spike Lee. That's when I said, this isn't about me. I'm representing my mentors at this point, or anybody that's poured into me or giving me an opportunity. So mentors are extremely important. And also I think it's important because I was willing to be a part of the process. Yeah. And the process wasn't always fun at all. Yeah. But when I look back at it, now I can walk on set and, A-list actors can say to me, why are you so calm? And I'm like, well, I'm not really calm inside, but
but I'm good at acting.
Exactly. I learned how to deal with it, and now I'm kind of level-headed. And sometimes I'm not calm, but I'm human. So there's that.
Okay. Is there a character from a book, TV, or movie that you would love to do the costume design for? Specific character is sort of the question here.
Specific?
Well, is there a character, from a book or a TV or movie that you would love to design for?
That's a cool question. I would actually love to design The Coldest Winter Ever. The book.
The Coldest Winter Ever? So it's all the characters in the book?
Yeah, I've envisioned that. I think that story needs to be told. But I mean, if we're doing like something that everyone knows, I would say I wouldn't mind redoing Beetlejuice.
Wow, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, it's out there now.
Aggie.
Okay, how do you navigate tough conversations, particularly when it comes to too many cooks in the kitchen, but still have your own creative voice? So we kind of touched upon this question.
I think the safest way I know I have fellow costume designers in the room. I think the safest way is just to go back to your research. Like that's what that, you know, because everyone's gonna come into it, but at the end of the day, if it's a period piece or even research period, and you know that it may get a little bit touchy feely, you just say, hey, this is the research, you know, and so let's talk about it. Let's talk through it. Because I'm the type of costume designer, when I'm doing a fitting, after I put together a look, one of the first questions I ask is, do you feel like your character? Because what I've learned and what I had to explain, you know, I tell some actors, you're the actor, so you live in this body, but I'm the costume designer and I create what's the exterior of the body. So we're two in the same kind of. So we have to meet in the middle.
Right.
So yeah, it definitely goes back to research, and sometimes that's just incorrect.
Right. How do you think the film industry can become more inclusive and have more people of color represented behind the camera?
I think that happens with department heads. I definitely do the best that I can to hire people of color. I do think it's time that more stories are told, you know, for those of color. And one thing I will say is this industry is the type of industry where you have plentiful opportunities, but try your best to be prepared or learn as much as you can till you can't learn anymore. And then, you know, be okay with taking the steps, if that makes sense, to climb the ladder.
Okay, I am going to navigate down. Okay. When scouring for postmodern period pieces, are you modifying modern clothing to look 1990s or 1980s, or are you actually going to vintage and consignment and thrift stores looking for your pieces?
Oh, absolutely not recreating. Well, let me not say that. I recreated. So in the presentation that I had for Wu-Tang Clan, there was an MCM, there was actually an MCM tracksuit that one of the characters wore.
Ooh.
Thank you. I'd like to publicly say thank you to Misa Hilton, who is the creative director at, excuse me if I'm not saying this correctly, but she works for MCM, or she's with MCM. And when I reached out to her, I said, this is something that I'm trying to create. You were a stylist in the 90s. Is the silhouette correct? And she said yes. And then she, you know, I told her I designed kind of like how I wanted it, and we met in the middle, and she recreated a look. But I would like to pat myself on the back for Wu-Tang Clan, because most of what you saw, for the most part, I would say 95%, audience, please chime in. The polo was from the 90s. Wow. The Pretty Belows were from the 90s. The Snow Beach jacket was from the 90s. Other than the Carhartt, which that design hasn't changed. A lot of what I was very adamant about it being from the 90s.
And so are you yourself going and finding them?
Sometimes.
All the pieces?
I mean, yeah. In that regard, because it was a TV series, I did have shoppers, and I did have an assistant designer, 2 assistant costume designers that assisted me in finding and looking for some of those costumes.
Because I think the other thing too that a lot of people often maybe don't think about is that a costume designer, and maybe I'm wrong, but aren't you responsible not only for what the lead characters are wearing, but what every single person in every shot is wearing, right?
Yes.
And so that is a lot of thinking about not just the nuances of the main characters, but you know, who the waitress might be, or the people walking down the street. I mean, it's such a huge world building, basically, that you have to do through clothing.
I definitely, Black Klansman was one that I was definitely, and she's got to have it, where the background, I approved the background. They were dressed, and then I would look at them. Sometimes I would have the director with me. And also on the movie that I'm on now, definitely, you know, I have photos sent to me, and they'll be approved. And then they go to set, and then I see how they look on set. Because what happens is you have the main cast, who I have a color palette, like a tight knit color palette for, and then you don't want background, because that's what they are. You don't want them to kind of have on the same color. It's like in a Rubik's Cube that you're always moving around.
That's amazing. Okay, let's see. When presented with a project, what is your decision-making progress in regards to who wears what?
Oh, say that again, I'm sorry.
So the question is, when presented with a project, what is your decision-making process in regards to who wears what? And so I'm assuming that you're starting with the main characters, sort of like what we were just discussing, and coming up with a color palette. Well, you tell us. But.
Well, sometimes the script is very specific, so it'll tell you what that person should be wearing. Sometimes it's not at all. One thing that I did for Nola, I mean, other than her being, you know, considered boho chic or Brooklyn boho chic.
Yeah.
I asked the director, what music did she listen to? Because if
absolutely
I vibe or music, then I can kind of assume how she dressed.
Yeah.
And I asked that typically, depending on some projects, I'll say, well, what is this person's soundtrack? Because at that point, it's just layers. Like music has layers to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That kind of like helped me hone in on Nola Darling. But you know, Jamie's wife on She's Gotta Have It. It was clear as day that she was, well, in the script, that she was an AKA from Spelman. So if you notice, if you go back, you see, I mean, and I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And so, you know, I was like, oh, pearls, no problem. So we did it. And so sometimes it's very specific.
Yeah. Okay. This is a question maybe for somebody aspiring to become a costume designer. How do you actually pitch a director, or how do you get chosen for the job? And are there important things to make sure to cover in an interview?
For someone who wants to be a costume designer? Well, I guess my question to that question is, what have they done? And not, I'm just trying to figure out how, so I'm assuming they have some type of experience in costume designing, small projects.
Yeah, I would assume, yeah.
I think really, one thing I've learned is definitely about relationships. You know, like when you're on set and you have somebody that's a camera operator, have a chat with them. 9 times out of 10, they want to be a director and they're up and coming. So they may want to shoot something on the weekends. That's how you get your
interesting. Yeah.
Like one thing I learned at Howard University is how to network.
Mm-hmm.
And don't be afraid to network, because you never know who you're going to be talking to. You never know who you're going to be collaborating with. Mm-hmm. It's 5 years down the line. So have those conversations. If you're on set, you know, within the constraints of your I would say your position. But yeah.
So do you think that when somebody's looking to hire their costume designer, that they're looking for specific qualities, like that person is a historian, like they really understand history, or that they just have flair, or like, is there like something that you find directors are looking for over and over and over again, a particular trait?
I'm not sure. I think that would, I mean, particularly for me, I guess that would be a conversation with the directors that I work for.
Right.
I have worked with. Yeah. I think that a lot of times, right, like we're students of each other's work. So a lot of times some directors will say, I've paid attention to your work and I want to work with you because you have, you know, you have attention to detail, or I know I can tell you like texture, I can tell you like this, and this is my process. So that's sometimes how it works. But yeah, I think having that conversation with the directors or.
Okay, so someone's asked, you seem to be doing so many things at once. How do you go about finding balance while at the same time making sure that each goal and each project gets your full attention?
Funny enough, I actually try not to double up on projects, to be quite honest. Because for me, my process never stops. I'm constantly always doing research to the very last minute, meaning like when we're like down to the wire of principal photography.
Yeah.
And so for me personally, I don't, you know, unless it's a very small project, like a commercial here or there, I try not to take on as many projects. Because I feel like I'm, you know, at the end of the day, I'm the costume designer, but I'm also a student. So if I'm not paying that much attention to what I'm studying, then I don't think it will translate in my costume design.
Right. I just want to say that I'm like skipping over a lot of lovely comments about what an amazing job you've been doing, what great work you've been doing. A cousin of yours just said that God is doing awesome work through you and continue to be blessed. So I want to acknowledge that there's lots of these kinds of comments. I'm just trying to jump over them and get to the questions.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is a question that is something I've been noticing in the world of sneakers is how personal sneakers are and how giving somebody a pair of sneakers is an intimate gift, particularly for men. You have to know a person's shoe size, style, and identity. Can you explain the significance of one man giving another man a pair of sneakers? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think that sort of the subtext of this is like a costume designer, right? This one person's got to be paying very close attention to what the gift recipient might want, might wear, and what size they are. I mean, that's quite a confession of friendship.
For sure. You know, I think for me, confession, when I am with, you know, whoever I'm with at the moment, you know, I tend to look down to see what type of sneakers or shoes.
Right. Yep, guilty.
And it also tells me where that person may live. I mean, no pun unintended to where someone lives, but like New Yorkers walk a lot. So their shoes, you know, it's purposeful that sometimes, like Gucci came out with, you know, that's not the only brand, by the way, where they're actually look worn. And so I think I think that actually goes to the person who's actually giving a gift, like to be thoughtful, actually pay attention to the nuances of the person and like actually listen to, you know, how they dress or if they want to transform the way that they dress. And so you could be the person who actually, you know, helps them go over the ledge if they want to start dressing a little bit differently and inspire them.
Yeah, I think it would be an exceptionally sweet gift to receive.
Sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Okay, so here is Enrique, who's saying, having exercised your talent in various areas, film, TV, stage, and children's books, what is your dream project, or whom is your dream talent to collaborate with on a future project?
So there's two projects that I actually have come across my desk that I'm like, from my mouth to God's ears. And one of them will take place in Africa, and comes to pass. And I'm even, you know, I'm honored that the project and the producers are even interested in me, to be quite honest, in my vision. So that would be one that I'm definitely, you know, I'm manifesting. And I said that because I remember in grad school, I said I always wanted to design an opera, and I never thought in a million years that I'd actually be the person designing the first Black opera, which is
amazing. Absolutely amazing. And you said it's coming to Toronto.
It'll be Toronto at the Volcano Theater in 2021.
Okay. We will definitely keep our eyes open for that.
And it's supposed to travel. So it's going to leave Toronto and then it'll come to the stateside.
Is it opening in Toronto?
Yes. In Toronto.
Are you going to come up? Will you be up here for it? Awesome. Okay. And you said you had another project? So I got a little side swipe by the Toronto bit.
Projects. I mean, you know, I try my best to always dedicate some of my time back to theater because I consider myself a theater baby. So yeah, definitely probably another theater project and one that speaks to my heart. And then, you know, like the two projects I mentioned.
And so that actually kind of fits in with the next question as well, which is, how do you actually make your decision to work with somebody? You know, we've kind of talked about like how you might get chosen, but how do you actually choose? Do people come to you and you just are like, nope, that doesn't work for me? I mean, you must. And so how do you make those choice to turn things down? I
wouldn't quite say I turn things down. I think for me, you know, I I'll admit I'm a bit of an empath. So if I read a script and I don't think it fits with my morals and my values, then there's that answer.
Yeah.
I have had scripts. I read a recent script that touched me so to my core that it actually made me cry. You know, and it's a project that's coming out, and or it's going into pre-production, and I had the opportunity to speak to the writer, and I told the writer I had never, other than me reading the play Ruined, which for those who are into theater, Lynn Nottage she's a playwright for that. This particular project definitely touched me, and it was it was to the point where I had to make a decision on if it would be something that I can take on emotionally. But I understand what my role would play in this story, but sometimes it's just timing. Sometimes I'm just not available.
Right. So this is a different kind of personal question, which is, what do you think about your own personal style? What do you like to wear on a Sunday to brunch?
Oh, Sunday to brunch? I mean, for those who know me personally, it could be anything, to be quite honest with you. Yeah, and I shouldn't say anything, I always, sorry about that. I always, when I was growing up, I tell people I came up in the crazy, sexy, cool era. I'm a 80s baby. I'm telling my age. So, comfortable is a thing. Like, that is important to me. But also being a bit of, sexy, chic, and just mixing in between. I have high-end pieces. I have no problems with going to the thrift store. Funny enough, I started in the thrift store. And that's really when I started to really fall in love with clothes. I love, as we know, love sneakers. I love shoes. I love jewelry. My father's a jeweler. So I've been exposed to this since I was a kid.
So I'm going to ask I'm going to ask maybe 5 more questions.
Sure.
And then we're going to wrap up the formal part of the evening. But there are really a lot of questions. And so how we're going to handle it, because we were anticipating that we'd be getting this kind of level of questions, is that once we do the formal ending, Marcy has agreed to stay on for a little bit longer and will continue to answer questions. But we know that people can't hang on for forever. So 5 more questions and then the formal part will be done. Okay, so this is doing the Scott Joplin opera. Were you able to find the shoes or did you have to make them?
Actually, I purchased them.
Okay. Were they vintage or were they contemporary?
They were, I mean, I would replicas for sure.
Yeah. What are they? Because I don't even know. It was like a lot of boots?
Yes.
Like ankle boots? Yeah.
A lot of ankle boots. They were not leather, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have to know how to sew to become a costume designer?
You do not. But as the illustrious Reggie Ray told me when I was, considering becoming a costume designer, he told me he actually made me go take a sewing class and a pattern making class. And the reason why I said it is because it allows you, in the process of when you actually get a project where you're building, and the project that I'm actually wrapping up now, I built 90% of the costumes. And what I mean by building is I rendered them, I fabric swatched.
Yeah.
From fabric swatching to fabrication, I had to explain my rendering to my tailor.
Yeah.
And where I wanted the seams, where I wanted the hem.
And don't you even run into problems when, like, if you're doing a piece set in the 1920s and vintage clothing from the period might not fit contemporary bodies, right? And so don't you have to often make things?
Yes. So the movie that I did, Passing, which is starring Tessa Thompson and Ruth Negga, and also Andre Holland, there's a scene, I believe that's coming out this year, or actually next year, early next year. There's a scene where one of the main characters, she unfortunately commit suicide, but I had to make her dress. And the reason why I had to make her dress was because she falls in a pile of snow. So when you're shooting, you could shoot that scene 3 times, but you can't use the same costume the same time. So she had to change 3 times. So I had to make the dress. I had to make the same dress basically.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. This is from Callie. So proud of you, fellow Howard University alumni. So happy to see that you're working with the BSM. I had the honor of touring the museum and interviewing Mrs. Bada for CNN. As a lover of shoes and history, this is one of my all-time favorite museums. Well, that's very nice. As a fellow designer and someone that has interviewed Marcy, okay, this is great. Okay, let's see. Okay, do you have any advice for someone who really would like to transition into costume design but doesn't have any experience?
Yes, I think you should be a PA in the costume department.
Okay.
Start there.
Full stop. Okay.
Or if you have the opportunity, it's a little tricky because unfortunately the world we live in, COVID, but if you have the opportunity to volunteer at a theater.
Yeah, even community theater, right? Something local.
Or even in a stock room at a costume shop. Because
that's a good idea too. Then you can network. Right?
Well, yeah, but then you also learn the period costumes, and that's what I had to do at University of Maryland. While I thought it was punishment at the time, it made a lot of sense now that I look back at it.
Okay, so 2 people have asked this, but so far, what has been your favorite film that you've worked on and why?
All of them. Why? Because I learned something different from all of them.
Okay, and all right, I'll do one more. I can't even remember. I said I'd do 5 and I stopped counting. Some of these questions you've kind of answered. So how do you deal with feeling that your art is not your own when dealing with creating costumes for a specific story or director?
I never feel that way because it is my art. It's my interpretation of the story.
Okay. And then this will be the last one before I wrap it up. And this is a big question, which is, what is your research process like?
Oh gosh, it starts with, for Black Klansman, when I received the script for Black Klansman, strangely enough, this is gonna sound weird, but the 2 movies that I watched was obviously Gone with the Wind and I watched Malcolm X. And I was wrapping a film at that point in Dominican Republic. And so I just started to dive deeply into the Invisible Empire. I definitely started to dive deeply into the Colorado Springs.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I requested when I was doing Black Klansman was to actually go down to Howard University, my alma mater, to do research at Moreland Spring Arm, because I know that they have archives of, old Essence magazines, Jet magazines, and they also have the journal entries of Stokely Carmichael, which we know as Kwame Ture. But a lot of those photos at the time were a part of his journal. Mm-hmm. So that helped me, and when I say nuances, that helped me with Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael's character on Black Klansman. If you notice, he's wearing a bracelet. Mm-hmm. And when I mentioned that to the actor, he didn't, at first he was like, well, why are you giving me, I could see it, like, why are you giving me a cuff?
Yeah.
I, again, went to my research and I said, notice in all of these photos that he's a cuff, but he's also not American. And, and that just goes back to those nuances. Sometimes I watch movies. The movie, as I mentioned, I'm doing a 1950s movie. I went back and actually watched a lot of movies that were designed by Edith Head. Mm-hmm. Costume design is impeccable.
Yeah, she's amazing.
A lot of Alfred Hitchcock, and so it put me into perspective of the design and just the world during that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, like you said, there's a lot more questions. So But I want to officially, for those of you who have to leave, I want to officially thank you so much, Marcy, for agreeing to be this year's Founders Lecturer. I think that your work is really so impressive, and I'm just feel lucky that we've been able to have this conversation live. And the questions have been great. So anybody who wants to stay on, please do, because we will continue to answer them. So thank you again for showing up. Everyone who's got to go, I completely understand. And are you ready for more questions, Marcy? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, lots of thank yous. Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, what was your most challenging assignment as a costume designer, and how did you solve it?
Most challenging. There's that word again.
Was it making the dress 3 times?
No. Oh God, no. My most challenging costume design. I had to find a pair of Jordans in 45 minutes in New York. And we were in between lunch, and the actress needed them like
right away.
Minutes. That is a challenge because it involved continuity. So there was no way I could change her costume at all.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that was challenging. I would say actually when I designed the movie in Dominican Republic, I had to learn about navigating in another country, to be quite honest with you, and how, the politics affect a lot of that there. And then also just import and export.
Right.
And, living in America, you can easily do Amazon Prime and it'll come to you sometimes in a day, sometimes the same day. But in Dominican Republic, there was all, it would go to another place and then it'll sit there in a factory or a house, and then it'll get on a plane and then come to me. So everything was a two-week lag time.
Right. Yeah, that would impact
a lot. Change. Like the film doesn't change. So you know, improvise. And that I'm thankful that I came up in theater, because a lot of times you don't have money, you have to improvise. So that's what I ended up doing.
Do you aspire at all to develop your own line of clothing or shoes?
Everybody asks me that. I dibble and dabble. In answer to your question, yes, eventually. And yes, I would like to have my own shoe.
Ooh, okay. Again, we have stuff to talk about. Okay. How do you choose the people that will be on your costume team? And do you usually use regular contracts, or are you always working with different people because of the location?
Well, that's a 2-part question. And answer to your question, yes, sometimes it is. Again, it's about relationships, right? Yeah. So yes, there will be times where there are crew members that I actually work with on a regular basis. But then also, like for instance, me being in Detroit, there are at least 5 or 6 people on my crew that I've never worked with before. And the only thing I can go off of really is their resume. And so, yes, I think, and again, it goes back to Dominican Republic. I was the only person from America in my department. And everyone else was new. And I just, we just became a team.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I'm beginning to see more high fashion labels making sneakers. What are your thoughts? What was previously considered streetwear is now high fashion. What do you think about that?
I think that it's cool. I think that they understand that that's a market, and I think that I mentioned earlier that I grew up in the 90s. So at that time, Nike, for the most part, was prominent in the market, in particularly where I grew up. And so having the opportunity for consumers to have access to those luxury brands and whatever feeling it gives them, I think it's kind of cool. In my opinion, streetwear, I think that's a conversation for another day, but to sum it up, I think streetwear has always been a thing. Whether or not,
I feel like high fashion's playing catch up.
For sure.
Is what's happening. Yeah.
Because you got to think about it, and he's a dear friend of mine, but in the 90s, and actually he and she is a dear friend, they're both dear friends of mine. But you know, you have the Dapper Dans and you have the April Walkers out there that at that time that, you know, we can go to Dapper Dan. He, for the most part, that was high fashion. Whether or not the brands acknowledge him, that's
Correct. Yeah,
on him, you know.
absolutely. Yeah, and they're now catching up.
Right, and so streetwear, for the most part, or logomania, let's just say, that's just now coming into what's being cool. But, you know, entertainers and rappers, and at the time, those who were considered deemed cool, they always wore it. And that was considered high fashion to them.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
And so I think it's smart, you know, but it's an open market.
Yep, I agree. Okay. Okay. What sources would you use for a project that was set well into the future?
Anything and everything. I mean, you know, yeah.
Talk about world building, right? I mean,
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like for instance, a play that I worked on that I assist Helen Huang on, which is, I mentioned her earlier. She designed, I remember we were in grad school, she did Once on This Island. And she was adamant about us keeping the like little, you know, in the I say pop, I'm from Chicago, but the world says soda. The little, it's like
the tabs.
Yes, and she was like adamant about us keeping the tabs. She actually made a costume.
That's cool.
And so Once on This Island, that particular version was set in the future. So sky's the limit. Like you could go and be as creative as possible. And those are the cool projects. I mean, not that one project is cooler than the other, but at that point, that's when the dreaming starts. You know, you're like, oh yeah, I can walk down the street and pick up this whatever and make it.
Okay, so have you ever had an actor say that they absolutely hated something that you tried to dress them in?
Nope.
All right, so you didn't even have to resolve it.
But I have had an actor that said, how can we, not necessarily that I was not on track, but they thought a little bit, they thought out their character and the evolution of their character and how can I add a costume piece. I have had that happen.
Oh, that's interesting. And I guess you had the discussion about the cuff, right?
For sure.
You know, yeah. And so you just proved it with history. Okay. Are there any more books in your future?
Maybe. You know, it's funny. During this project, I acquired so many fabric swatches. So my dear friend, he and I have talked about actually creating a coffee book based off of the fabric swatches that we've acquired and like coming up with backstories, like short stories.
Oh,
so
that's fun.
It'll be like a fabric swatch, I don't know, of Army fatigue, and it'll be like a short story next to it. At least that's what I'm saying. We still have to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah, that's one that I think would be pretty interesting. And the idea behind that is to teach one who wants to be in theater and or a fashion designer about fabric. And not like, because you know, sometimes you're going to, I've seen it where, you know, you have students, I live in New York, where they go into Mood and B&J and they're like hiding around the corner trying to swatch and nobody's explaining to them that that's a knit, that's cotton, that's, you know, like, so just trying to help that process.
I saw today a book. I actually think it's a series of books from the 1830s to the 1850s with fabric swatches in them. Mm-hmm. It's how, you know, people could buy their fabrics, but I'll send you a link. It's a really interesting way of organizing fabric that maybe would be of interest. Okay, do you have a favorite sneaker of all time?
Ooh. Yes, but it changes.
So it's not of all time. It's
I love. This is gonna sound one of my favorite sneakers. Well, to be quite honest, I love the Jordan 1s. I actually just started liking Jordan 1s.
Really? You're from Chicago.
No, right? We didn't really wear. I mean, I don't remember ever really wearing like Jordan 1s when I was growing up. The 4s, any color. Mm-hmm. Like I said, the Tim Hardaways.
Yeah.
Now, like my favorite sneaker. like I don't feel, you know, crazy wearing them now. And I was so excited that I found them actually in Detroit a couple of weeks ago. What other shoe do I like? To be honest, any shoe that's comfortable and fly. I love Asics. Love Asics. I just like because they're comfortable, and I mean I'm on my feet most of the time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I really love I lived in DC, so it's nothing wrong with the gray and white New Balance. That's a staple.
Yeah.
That I have. Sauconys. I actually had a pair of Sauconys I loved, and I have a new pair of Sauconys. Actually, I just found some Sauconys recently. It's whatever.
Okay. I think I'm gonna pick 3 more questions. Okay, you mentioned Edith Head. Do you have other designers like Adrian whose clothing you like?
Or costume design?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the list goes on. I admire Ann Roth, who, like I said, I had the opportunity to costume or assist. Ruth Carter, Paul Tazwell for sure. Aggie Rogers, hands down. She's, you know, great. I love the costume designer from Coming to America. Anything where you know.
Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's kind of random, but
but it's true. The costumes are actually really memorable.
For sure.
Yeah.
Who else? Reggie Ray.
Okay. Somebody's asked, how was your experience working in London?
You
went to school, right?
Yeah, I was in school in London. How was my experience? Life-changing.
Yeah. What made it life-changing?
Well, one day I left class. As I said, I was, you know, I prefer
taking the double-decker bus. Yeah.
And I ended up at Harrods. And one of my classmates told me, she said, you have to go to Harrods. So I made my way to Harrods. I remember walking into Harrods. Again, shout out to Misa. I remember walking into Harrods, and it was this huge room full of nothing but MCM. And I was like a kid in the candy store. I ended up getting lost. I ended up going through the fur section. Again, I'm from Chicago. So I'm God, look at all this fur. I was trying to make my way to the shoe section. Somehow or another, I got lost. Anybody who's ever been to Harrods, you know, it's like a maze. Really like a thing.
Yeah.
Long story short, I was supposed to go to see the Dior exhibit. I made my way upstairs to the Dior exhibit. And when I first walked into the Dior exhibit, there was a project, which I know now, which is a projection of someone hand sewing a purse.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm again looking at this short projection like, wow, that's what they mean by, you know,
craft.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I remember I turned the corner and I saw a dress, which was your door, and the dress was made of flower petals. And I'm like, whoa. Then I hit another corner and I saw all of the first ladies, including Princess Diana, may she rest in peace, their dresses. And at every moment it was just a turn. And I remember going into this other section where you had Christian Dior, his muslin, but they were like 2 to 3 inches.
Yeah.
Sketches. At the end, you see him as a young designer. And at that point, that's when I saw myself. I'm like, he was at that point, he was around my age. And I walked out of Harrods, forever changed. I was like, London, just walking the streets of London is something, you know, in itself. Shortage is unexplainable. Like, if you can ever make your way to Shortage and just go thrift shopping or just be around, get fish and chips, it's just
But it's nice to know that it was an exhibit.
Yeah, it was a really good exhibit.
Yeah.
It was Christian Dior's exhibit.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so there's lots and lots and lots of thank yous, lots of congratulations. And so I think this is going to be the last question. It's a long one. Okay. I remember the actor portraying the villain in No Country for Old Men saying that he had a problem getting into his character, and what enabled him to nail it was when he and the stylist found a haircut that he eventually wore in the movie. Do you collaborate closely with hairstylists?
Yes, very much so.
Mhm.
LaWanda Pierre, who was the department head of She's Gotta Have It, she and I definitely had conversations early on about NOLA. I mean, given the fact that we had, she had her conversation with the director, and then back to me and just how I would plan on dressing NOLA. But if you notice, season 2, NOLA had braids, and that was
Yeah.
purposeful, and she wanted NOLA to have braids, so that
Yeah.
was really cool. For the show that I'm on now, I definitely have conversations. I had conversations early on with hair as well as makeup,
Yeah.
because it all comes together, particularly for 50s, and so you
Yeah.
have to be very specific with that. So yes. And I
Fascinating.
always share my research with those in the head, so they see kind of where I'm going.
Yeah. Well, I think that I'm going to call it. Those are all the questions that you're going to be peppered with. You can now take a break. I know you've been working all day. I want to personally thank you so much for your candor, for your willingness to answer all of these questions, and for your amazing insights into your process and how you've gotten here, and also where you're headed. So truly, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining. Really, it was unprecedented numbers of people who've been able to come to this Founders Lecture, in part because we had to do it online, but truly because you were the speaker. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to you, Elizabeth, for even reaching out and asking me. It's such an honor, Christine, and obviously the Bata Museum, which we all know I hold shoes dear to my heart. So thank you. And thank you everybody who joined. I really appreciate it and the enthusiasm.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, good night.
Good night.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.